G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Now, we do have a fair bit to go over today. So, look, we're going to start with the maps. We're going to then talk about Transnistria. We're going to look at Poland, Ukraine's border issue that's going on, a failed special forces mission, and then we'll talk about AWACS and its ability in the air for further targeting of fighter aircraft and just the amount of ISR capability that actually adds into the sky. And we'll talk about how important that actually is. But first, I want to talk about something on the maps, and we're going to talk about Transnistria, and this will link into the map. So, of course, this is Ukraine. These red areas have been occupied since 2022, and the purple here since 2014. Of course, these green are areas that Ukraine has liberated back or where Russia has pulled out of. This is Russia through here, Belarus, Poland. This is Moldova, and then we see this red area here is Transnistria. Of course, a leftover, I guess, relic, you could say, of an area from the Soviet Union, but for intents and purposes, somewhat separate from Moldova. Now, we talked about this last week, I believe last week, maybe the week before, time is getting away on me, about how important this area could be, and I spoke with a Ukrainian, I can't say who, but he is doing some operational planning, and he hit me up about what I had said. So only today, more and more is coming out about Transnistria. So I've named this Willie's crystal ball. So let's look at what was said the other week, or what came to me. Now, I've written about Transnistria before. It's one of the largest ammo depots on Earth. But from open source, what is actually there is dangerous, unstable Cold War era World War II ammo. If it goes up, it'll be akin to Hiroshima. But that said, Cold War ammo, still unbelievably useful. Even we're seeing a lot of weapon systems from, say, the Second World War being used in this operation as well. So can it actually be used? What is actually in there as far as weapons, vehicles, ammo, all this? We know that it is a huge store, and we spoke about this about 18 months ago, maybe even 2 years ago, about the importance that this could come in. But I have a map saved from the first few days of the war, and you can see from the positions that that was their objective. At the time, people spoke about Odessa, but if you look at the map, it's laughable for two reasons. Odessa coastline is cliff faces. It would be impossible for a generic seaborne landing, and secondly, why? It's cut off from the rear and is surrounded. Thankfully, they were beaten back when they reached Mykolaiv, that the Russian logistics couldn't keep up. But basically what him and I spoke about was a forward attack into Odessa, very difficult, just lay the land, and amphibious assaults are unbelievably difficult to actually pull off, especially in modern war, but at any time. But what he was saying was they weren't trying to do that. They knew that if they could get up into here where we see the green, that they had to push, the Russians, by they, had to push up into here, and if they could cut off and then rejoin their forces in Transnistria, that this would essentially cut then off Odessa and would be much more difficult for the supply in there. And we've spoken before about Russia's probable eventual need to launch something into Odessa because, of course, the Black Sea Fleet is getting pounded by then the seaborne drones, and also strategically, Ukraine have the economic ability to then get grain and stuff out through here. Of course, that fuels the war longer. So very important. We've spoken about this connect through here before. Now, it seems like something may be setting up here. I am going somewhere with this. Well, today, all over the news, this has come out. The politicians in Moldova's Kremlin-backed breakaway region of Transnistria have appealed to the Russian President Vladimir Putin to protect it against pressure from Chisinau, of course, the capital then of Moldova. We appeal to the Federation Council and State Duma of the Russian Federation requesting measures to protect Transnistria amidst increased pressure from Moldova. So that's what has been said, but their appeal stops short, directly asking Moscow to integrate Transnistria into Russia. So sort of like the annexation, say, of Crimea. I did laugh when this bloke then wrote this: Russia is close to studying the request from Transnistria Council of Deputies on Assistance. The whole thing is funny because Moscow probably helped write the proposal themselves. Thought that was funny. But The resolution noted that 220,000 Russian citizens live inside the region. Of course, this region is made up of Russians, Ukrainians, and Moldovans, and has been there as an unrecognised state since the fall of Soviet Union. If you want to see a video inside it, the bloke, bald and bankrupt, he does a video inside here. But Moldova has repeatedly denied putting pressure on Transnistria and accused Russia of destabilising the situation in the country through its manoeuvres in the breakaway region. Of course, Russia calls the troops they've got there as peacekeepers, saying that there's about 1,500 troops there. So not an amount that would launch some, large operation, but it's still an amount of soldiers. And we do know that it's one of the biggest depots of equipment in the world. Of course, very, very important. And here we see the free accession of Transnistria into the Russian Federation in 2006, with 98% of voters then pushed it forward. Furthermore, this is actually from Russian sources of exactly what then the Foreign Ministry wrote back to this request from Transnistria. That protecting the interests and residents of Transnistria, our compatriots, is one of the priorities. All requests are carefully considered by the Russian relevant departments. Vladimir Putin is doing like a press speech conferencing thing today, their time, so it might be still like another 12 hours, and it is expected he will talk about this situation, so it'll be interesting what actually happens there. And then a pro-Ukrainian candidate says this: maybe there should be an SMO launched by Ukraine into Transnistria. And we actually spoke about this before, that it's one of the largest arms depots in the world. It's got a hell of a lot of old Soviet equipment, which Soviet equipment is still being used widely by Ukraine and Russia, that it could really help alleviate some of the problems that Ukraine and Russia are actually facing with equipment shortages and replacement of losses as well. So it is interesting. I know that those two are just Twitter posts we brought up, but that's how a lot of people are feeling about this. And I think the speculation here, it's important to talk about that this is sort of coming to a head, and only a week or two after we spoke about maybe the importance of this, we're starting to see some moves there. And I think that that bloke hits it when he says that Russia had a lot to do with the proposal coming out. So interesting. Let me know what you think will happen in this region. But then we are actually going to have a look at the maps and see what is changing. So, of course, we're going to whip down here Donetsk Oblast. Of course, this is Donetsk City. There's Pisky, and then we have Avdiivka. Now, every day we look at this map, things look dramatically different. There are big moves happening here. So today's the 29th. Let's step back to yesterday. Then we saw this move out from Krasnodarivka, but Badachi area. Yesterday, the smaller move, day before. So this is stepping up, and then till then today. Now, reports are more recent than the map updates I've got, that Orlivka has completely fallen and that Thankyou is basically under occupation as well, but that is just from sources. I don't have anything in stone about that, but you can see there is a further major shift up here, and that, this, if we take to here, this is the Western sources deep state map, that let's round to 13-kilometer movement is a hell of a lot. People can't say that it isn't, and you can't say that it's not strategically important. That said, where will this end once the momentum has gone? Well, we don't know, but we know there are some physical borders coming up. Getting ahead of myself, so let's look then at the maps and some info. So I really like, this guy does some good stuff. So this is a Ukrainian reserve officer. He's fairly outspoken on Twitter about some of this. So when assessing the state of prepared fortifications post-Avdiivka and other key areas that might become front lines this year, disappointing is probably the best description. The defenses are not as nearly good as the ones the Russians have built. Solid strategic fortifications require joint efforts of the General Staff, Ministry of Defence and civilian government. It cannot be accomplished solely with the resources of exhausted brigades or individual battalions. We've heard at length about this. The defensive works needed to be started 18 months ago to try and stop these movements. That, yes, Ukraine was going on the offensive last year, but we know that this was going to come in swings and roundabouts. So it wasn't just going to be one complete sweeping offensive and that Russia were never going to have another chance to go on offensive. And now that we're seeing that, well, this bloke is saying at the inspection that things aren't ready. And things aren't ready, ammo problems, morale issues, shortages, US informational war, as well as problems in the house. This is when Russia will maybe throw everything at it to try and capitalize on that. Benny says, defensive positions with no ammunition to defend them are not going to hold very long. Avdiivka was well dug in. These positions have been abandoned now. But open field with no ammunition is even worse to defend. Being in defensive, not only do you require less troops, you require less ammo to defend that. So it's a win-win for defensive. It's much, much easier to defend something than assault something. And we see this with when Russia launched the invasion, that more troops, but a lot of problems straight off the bat. And we see the second example of this down somewhere like Robotny, Uruzhany, where Robotny, Ukraine, their counteroffensive got about 8 kilometers, Uruzhany maybe 10, but it's very, very hard, very costly being on that side of the fence. Anyway, maybe another dumb question, but what is the point of building extensive fortifications if Russians have total superiority in artillery and standoff munitions as glide bombs? The alternative is to fight against total superiority in arty without defendable positions. So, yeah, if Russia does have the glide bombs and this, you're still better off being in a defensive work than being outside of that. But they don't have complete dominance in the air, although I do think that is switching, but could switch back. We're going to talk about this a bit later. But artillery, as far as numbers, does seem to have the upper hand at the moment. So here we go. We see then Avdiivka, and we do have a few things to go over in this. Now, we do see these maps do go through the day. So at day 7:35, situation west of Avdiivka. Let me move this over so you can actually see. So here is Orlivka in here is by this red dot. The Russian army managed to capture approximately half of the locality of Orlivka after taking over most of the warehouses and the House of Culture. In addition, troops advanced from the southern streets, reaching the school where clashes with Ukrainian army are taking place. Now, one thing I will say is we're getting far less footage out than we were somewhere like Bakhmut, but where you can see this map is outdated at this point is, see, Stepovy, Berdachi, this red dot here, that this is now closed off directly through here, even by Deep State. Don't worry, we will get to it. Now, number 2, with the entry of the Russian army into the towns of Berdachi, Orlivka, Tonnenki, which you can see down here we spoke about, the chances of the Ukrainian army being able to hold the first line of defences are practically nil. The surprising speed of the Russian army's advance into this territory was due to the rotation of troops that took place to capture of Avdiivka, where troops from the rear, supposedly tasked with combing the town, began to advance as soon as the previous battle was over. So the exhausted troops who, actually took Avdiivka and moved through, then there was a rotation of guys to come and comb through, clear it out. And then instead of just, going and stopping, they took that advantage of the momentum and kept pushing through there. And this is what then the ISW was talking about yesterday, with Russia having the initiative on the upper hand. Now, this is then these lines of defense, and we see then the first line of defense coming down through places like Ulmansk and then ending up near Badachi, areas like this. Warmapper showed the same thing, but then, of course, this follows where these waterways are, and then the second one being further back in these areas, which I'm sure we may become familiar with a little bit later down the line, but you can line up where these reservoirs are through here and also here just to get an idea of where this is sitting. But with the capture of 3 locations mentioned at the beginning, Russian forces will cross the valley and attack the defences of Semenivka. After the capture, Russian troops advanced to the rear of the front line, taking the town of Ulmansk. Now, the fall of Ulmansk will open up the possibility of advancing west to Severny. So, of course, what it's talking about here is what could actually occur in their planning here. So once they move through to Ulmansk, then you'll move to the west and it will cut off, move to the west and it will continue cutting off areas in here, leading up to that second line of defense. It will be a complicated advance given the open field and the exposure of troops. Through here, completely open, very exposed, not a good situation in attritional war with artillery and drones. Something that happens in Nevelsky, but it will allow Russians to resolve the stalemate in the Pervmaisky axis, which is just down to the south here, where this hasn't really moved that much. We're going to talk about Pervmaisky and Nevelsky in a second, and move the fighting to the neighbouring Natolovi, which we see just up here, of course, pulling out these prongs similar to what we have seen before. Now, where I think this may go is we see Pervmaisky and Nafol, where they're not moving through open ground here. We've also seen then this train line through here that we have seen Russia trying to push up previously. Instead of moving across all this open ground, will there be more of this two-prong attack again and have a collapse through here, which we have seen work successfully before? I'm unsure. Anyway, on the other hand, Russian army will begin to advance north, where it will meet the second line of Ukrainian defense, much more consistent and consisting of a series of fortifications from Karlivka to Kalinovsky Reservoir, part of the Vovocha River, and the axis of the Novelskaya Persha here, until it reaches a stronghold here, from where it continues further north along the Karamak and Kalmovi. So this second line of defense runs basically all the way up. We can see where it runs out through here. But again, nothing is impenetrable, and there is some doubts over what the preparation actually there is. But Surak is saying that it is strong, that we don't know where this movement will actually then occur. In this situation, of course, that movement, Russian advance would be halted there and positional battles would return. It is then fighting will focus on the upper reaches of the railway, where we looked at, as well as those adjacent to here. It seems that this will coincide with the intensification of offensive operations on the Bakhmut axis and west of Donetsk city. So, of course, if you were to push out along here, you will see an intensification in Bakhmut, as of course these second line of defense is further away to try and move up the positional battle to get to there. Now, we need to just have a look just to the south. So we were looking here is where we saw this movement come down Pervomaysky, Nevelsky, where you would have heard Surak talk about. We do see a change in the map movement here, that Russia has extended control up to Nevelsky in here, and this is backed up then on this map. So Surak and Deep State, fantastic. It's lining up. Situation northwest of Donetsk City. Russian army made new advances southwest of Novelsky, reaching the outskirts of the settlement. And to me, this is looking like, it may come out on these prongs here and have a further collapse. It's not going to come out from Novelsky, I think, because it's the open ground here. I think more likely, we know that Russia like to do this. They like to try and envelope things, that it's going to move from Pervomaysky to here, which is what we heard about in the north. But at the same time, if they can expand, although pretty stagnant from Madiinka out, do you get a similar problem in Krasnohivka and Novelsky in here, where we do know that the Russians are making ground near Krasnohivka as well. Like the ISW said, and the ISW is a pro-Ukrainian think tank, that Russia have the initiative basically to launch when and where currently they want to on the front lines. So we just moved south of Avdiivka, we're speaking about in Krasnohivka. Now, we don't see any change on this map. We talked about this Novelsky, but we did see yesterday this movement up into Krasnohivka here, and then this update today from Surak, which has a video I can't show you, to be on the Telegram if you'd like to, of more movement right on this break-in into here. So we knew the dashes were breaking further down, but that now they are getting closer and closer where weapons are being dropped to. So recent video footage shows Russian army operations to enter the first part of Krasnohivka, attacking Ukrainian positions, multi-launch rocket systems and IFVs in this area as well. So let's talk about where these front lines actually ended up by the last post of day 735 by Surak. Situation west of Avdiivka at 1100. Or PM, so 2300. Russian army entered Berdachi, taking control over half of the village, so up in here. As a result, Ukrainian army retreated to Semenivka from the southern plantations, which forced troops to retreat from Orlivka too. So from Semenivka and Orlivka here as well. Only the northwestern part of the locality remains contested and not secured by Russian troops. Moreover, Russian forces entered in most of Tonenki except for the northern part, which is still under Ukrainian control, and the southern plantations west of Sverny. So there's a hell of a lot happening here. I actually think that the Deep State is showing maybe more control, at least in the south, than the Surak is showing. So this situation is moving. First line of defense here. Be very interesting to see what actually the fallback is here, and if that momentum burns out or can continue pushing from there. But one of the big things I think in Avdiivka, that it wasn't only the defenses, it wasn't a shortage of ammo, it was there seems to be a light switch flicked, and that Russia is having more success with their fighter aircraft. Of course, if they're using them more, they're going to have more losses, which we have likely seen. But again, we are seeing more and more of these, particularly Su-34 aircraft in the air, of which, you know, Russia's lost a few. I had a guy pull me up yesterday privately who actually works in like aircraft tech in Australia. And he's like, just because they have 150 airframes, any time at once, particularly with fighter aircraft, there's a hell of a lot that aren't flying, repairs, maintenance, all this stuff. So it may be 17% of those built, but at the same time, you got a lot out. So it may be higher than that because it's like a Formula One car. For every hour an F1 car keeps on the track, it's got days and days of fixing on the back end. So that's very true. I should have thought about that because it's in here somewhere, but I didn't. But we're going to speak about Bakhmut because we've seen those fabs that were very successful in Avdiivka have a shift to Bakhmut, and it does seem that they're having more freedom of movement in the air with these aircraft as well. So this is just a screen recorded video of this bloke here, but this is apparently a Ukrainian soldier talking about Russian air in Chasiv Yar. The Russian jets fly super close to the front. Turns, it means he's released the fab bombs. Glide bombs, bombs like this. The German Tornadoes, they did the same thing in Iraq with bombs, the Gulf War, is if you've got bombs that are like kinetic like this, it's not like a missile, is you can come along, screaming along, pull up, and of course that'll like flick it further. But he says, but once he turns, it means they've been released. So I'm guessing he hammers it up, gets rid of them, and then turns away back into safety. So then we see the trail here. So of course, this is what you see in the sky of aircraft. So it does seem a lot more freedom of movement here. And then we will start seeing him do a hard bank away. That means he's released the bombs, and they'll be told to then get to cover. So, very interesting to actually see them maneuvering over the front line. It does seem there's been an increase of how they can move that air power. Maybe the air defense systems, we know you can never have enough air defense systems for everywhere, that then maybe they have moved to other locations where we're seeing then things get shot down, say maybe the Sea of Azov, because an air defense system up here is not going to reach out into the Sea of Azov, somewhere where we saw, say, that A-50, very important AWACS aircraft, get taken out. But let's have a talk about here. So we know that Russia's goal here, this is why they're dropping bombs in Chasiv Yar, is to capture Kromove, which they've done. Ivanovsky in here, there sits a bit of a bowl of high ground in here to then have an assault eventually onto Chasiv Yar and collapse this area, of course, with their total goal being Kramatorsk or Sloviansk in here, but still a hell of a long way off if that were to ever occur. But Surak writes, this situation is deteriorating Ukrainian army in Ivanovsky. Here. Russian army made new advances in the locality during the last hours. The fighting is taking place in Tereshkovo Street. It is not true that this village has been taken. In fact, half of it is still under control. So hasn't been taken, but saying that half of this is now under Russian control, half of it is sitting in Ukrainian control. So I believe this street is the one he's talking about here. I could be incorrect, but still an important area just for how... Watch another one of my videos. I think yesterday I spoke about a look on like the topo map, and we have a look at the topography here and how that is then important. Now, where else do we need to have a look? So we're just going to move down to the south. Of course, this is Avdiivka, just to give you an idea of where we are. Of course, this is Novomatlivka, no change in Volgodar. We do see just to the west of Novodonetsky, we do see that there is maybe a correction here because we don't see any blue ground, but that Russia has lost some ground potentially in here. This doesn't line up, but there is said to be some changes in here as well. So, of course, we can see if we're above, let me zoom out a little bit, Volodany, this is where the changes are said to have taken place, that Russia made a bit of ground just in here and that Ukraine made some just in here, just down from Ruvnopol. So not in the same area that said it changed, but, you know, this could be a fluid front line. So some corrections were made at the forest north of Prudny, which is eventually recovered by the Ukrainian army. On the other hand, Russian army launched new attack northwest of it, forcing Ukrainian forces to retreat towards the road between Rivnopol and Stamorsky. Of course, in Kyiv, no change here, but said to be some major shifts in here from Syriac. Now, As that front, during the last 3 days, Ukrainian army recovered all the lost positions in Robotny, included the southern trenches as Russian army retreated to the original positions north of Novoborivka. So that Ukraine has pushed, we saw this push in from Russia over the past couple of weeks, and that they've said they've recovered all of it down in here, that Russia has to pull back and Ukraine has then recovered these trenches. Very important, knowing the defensive works in there, not being shown across then the other maps. Now, somewhere we are going to talk about is just going to zoom out a little bit. We're coming down Kherson Oblast, of course. This is where Odessa is, and we talk about this spit of land, as there has been a failed operation across to here. Again, I can't show the images. It's graphic, but it will be on Telegram if you'd like to see. But this has been confirmed. I saw it through the Russian channels, and then it started getting confirmed by the Ukraine channels. Tragic day for the 73rd Special Operations Center. So SF guys, some of their best troops. 4 guys reportedly killed. It's been, it's several by the photographs. It's clear. 1 taken prisoner as a result of a failed mission at Tendra Spit between Russian-occupied Kherson Oblast. And must we never forget, can't show you the photo. And then it was confirmed by their own Special Operations channel. Soldiers 73rd Naval Special Ops Center died heroically during combat mission with a clash for the Russian invaders. During the departure of the main forces of the group, after completion of a special task, the soldiers accepted their last battle, remaining in the formation forever. The heroic and extremely difficult combat work of the SSO units on land, sea, and deep rear of the enemy is a daily contribution of SSO soldiers to victory over the enemy. Always remember at what price our freedom is won. So saying that they covered a pullback from other elements. Now, what were they doing out in this spit of land? Well, we don't know exactly where this got engaged. It seems like the boat has maybe washed up here, and it does have, soldiers who were KIA in the boat. But many are saying that this was one of the missions we have seen before take place out into the Black Sea for, really like a flag raising mission. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, but we have seen missions like this previously, and we've also seen them all the way out to Crimea as well, and we have seen Russian Su aircraft engaging these boats as well. It's very hard to actually hit these in the water, but it has been a failed mission across to here. What could it be? It could be surveillance equipment. It could be as well, like laying surveillance equipment. It could be censoring equipment as well out in here, but we don't know. And like I said, there are missions just for PR stunts too, where people have said risking the lives of these best soldiers who take a long time to train. They're your best guys on the ground for a photo op is not worth it. Why are they doing this? And this was from a lot of the Ukrainian pages I was going was, what are these guys actually doing out here? Because it doesn't seem like they had that equipment on this sandy spit of land. What is actually going on? It wasn't a large enough force to actually form any sort of bridgehead. I don't know. That is just the speculation that I have read and seen about what is happening there. Now, while we're on the maps, we're going to talk about AWACS. So AWACS is like early warning aircraft control system. So basically a big plane with the radar on top. The Yanks have the E3, is that right? Whatever it is, I'll put it up here. The Aussies have the wedge tail, which is like leading the technology, I'm pretty sure, actually at the moment, the bloody Aussies. Aussies, if you don't know this, Australian radar systems, like the over the horizon radars, is like where we are like peak in the world, and we actually sell it back to the States. Proud Aussie shit. But the wedge tail is very, very high end, and we do know that there are planes like the P-8 Poseidons as well operating over the Black Sea, Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, these NATO countries, as well as in international airspace, and of course, space of other countries. I'll show the breakup of the Black Sea in a second, that are sending information into Ukraine. And of course, we're not giving Ukraine AWACS with F-16s. Now, AWACS is incredibly important for air warfare. This is why these A-50s, Russia would rather lose 20 Su aircraft than one of these A-50s that has gone down. Incredibly important. Same with us with our wedge tail and the F-18s. But F-35s is basically a big data collection center as well. We used with the Growlers. But that eyes in the sky sort of thing is incredibly important for modern operations. Of course, Ukraine's not getting AWACS with their F-16s. What has caused many to say, how effective will these then actually then be? So we have a little bit of information too about these and the importance. So this is, from what I've found, this is the breakup of then the Black Sea. Turkey, of course, NATO country, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria. But let's say that half of the Black Sea through here is where these could fly, as well as over any NATO land. So the best in the world being the wedge-tails at the moment. They're like unclassified range. Apparently, the absolute extent is 600 kilometers, but that is only using top-facing radar. So we don't. I'm not an expert on this, but if we do a measurement out here, let's see if where these sort of is going to be the max of these F-16s out 600. So you're coming through here. Of course, you come right down into somewhere like Romania, that you're going to get over, some of Crimea, some of the south, and then you come over where is, I think I've put 2 dots down. We come over where is land, then you're going to get a lot of the south through here, as well as the Sea of Azov. They're not going to be operating over the territory out here into Russia, but you're going to have, something look like this that is going to be able to have information relayed into the F-16s, making them far more deadly in the air. And of course, the effect on target far, far greater. This is already happening. It's just going to be more interlinked with a like Western to Western platform, rather than trying to transfer to like a MiG or Su aircraft that Ukraine is operating, but incredibly important. But the threat is that it is still going to be down in these southern areas, but up in the northeastern, without the AWACS, that these capability will be limited, although this is probably the more important area. Just an interesting thing, I think, to think about with these. Now, let's read about these. 23rd Feb 24, a Russian A-50 Mainstay D was destroyed, almost certainly by a surface-to-air missile while operating south of the Sea of Azov over Russian territory of Krasnodar. There's a remote chance the Russians inadvertently shot down the aircraft, so some are saying that, like fighter bombers said they shot that run down themselves. The second A-50 destroyed in as many months. Russia only began operating A-50 aircraft over the Sea of Azov in November 23, so pretty recently. 14th of Jan, Ukraine targeted one, saying with a Patriot, and then it went down. So lost 2 in a week. So, 2 in a month. So it is very important losses. The Russian Air Force will likely be able to recover the immediate loss of the A-50 because they have 7 operational airframes remaining. Yet the loss of 2 experienced specialist mission crews in as many months is highly likely to induce further strain and combat fatigue on the remaining force if they sustain constant operations. It is likely the Russian Air Force will, again, consider different operating locations, but Ukraine is demonstrating an ability to adapt quickly and continues to pose a threat. So I'm hearing that these A-50s have got actually scared off and are operating further back in Russia as well. But if we look at, well, I don't know the range of the A-50, but let's just say it's 300 kilometers, that it can operate further down in these areas as well, further back in territory. So still operating there, but I am hearing that they are further back. And the aircraft apparently is not the important thing. It's the amount of crew. You can have 8 to 12 crew on these, and it does take a long time to actually get people to the limit of these. Now, information post-22 about numbers of aircraft and stuff, very difficult because the informational sphere around everything just went poof. But this was pre-invasion numbers around these. So E3 Sentry, that's the Boeing one. The Yankom with the black dish on top is the one I was talking about before. But in 2020, Russia announced the testing of a prototype of the A100, which is expected to be completed in 2024. Same year, mass production of the plane is expected to start. The A100 is to replace the A50 as Russia's current AWACS system, which entered in 1984. 40 of these aircraft were produced. Only around 16 are thought to be operational with the Russian Air Force, with some of them being upgraded to the A50Us. So we think several of the A50Us are left, but there's still other ones that could be going through modification. We have seen, say, with the Tu-160s, that there has been further deep modifications to those as well. But for something I missed here, that the A100 is contracted to manufacture 39 A100s. So there are new ones that are in the pipeline. I'm not sure how the special military operation, the war in Ukraine, and sanctions have actually affected that production. It does seem that Russia can still make fighter aircraft, maybe in smaller numbers, but sanctions evasion, whatever, we're not sure how those will come in, but it will still have an effect and maybe replace those lost then A50s here as well. This has been a long video, I apologise, but we have a little bit of beef between Australia and Ukraine at the moment, especially coming off the back of MRH-90s and people calling out M1A1 Abrams tanks from Australia to go to Ukraine as well. I got asked about this on a podcast this morning for a Defence Force thing, and I was basically like, Australia doesn't have that many Abrams tanks. Australia, to my knowledge, we don't actually own our Abrams. It's like on exchange, and I'm pretty sure that exchange is we give America our radar tech, America gave us the Abrams, something like that, but it's not owned individually. So for us to even give Abrams, we can't do it, even if we want to. It has to be signed off by the states. We have like 70 Abrams. Let's say that 2/3 are actually combat operational, which is probably around that. If we give any number that's going to make a difference, you're talking 30, 40, that it's still going to have a huge impact on us, and it's going to, at the other end, have limited. You're better off fighting America over these because they've got thousands of them and they sent 30. But Ukraine's top diplomat in Australia has pleaded to Canberra, which is Australia's capital, to do more. Kyiv has called on Australia to significantly ramp up its military support, reopen its embassy in the Ukrainian capital, and help displaced Ukrainians with a pathway to permanent residency. So trying to get Ukrainians to be permanent in Australia, as well as pump up then military support. Australia is a very, very far away country. Anything moved into Ukraine, I spoke about this morning, anything moved to Ukraine is going to cost massive amounts of money because it's bloody expensive to have a plane with a 70-ton jet on it flying to Europe. Probably better off using that money dollar for dollar, bang for buck. This is something I think is very important in this war. Now that we know that money is very finite and the time is finite, what is getting the best dollar for dollar? And moving, say Australia donating money to buy Leopard tanks in Europe that are already there, more suited to the environment, probably way better bang for buck than saying, put one of your tanks on an aircraft, fly it across, and then it just soaks up that money pretty quickly. Anything defense, think about how much you'd think it would cost it's like a civilian street, times it by like 10, and that's how much it costs defense to do anything. Anyway, the ambassador speaking at National Press Club, where Defence Minister Richard Marles was in attendance, that Mr. I won't try and pronounce this, thanked Australia for its assistance so far, but said if Ukrainian life was ever to go back to normal, the assistance packages from Australia and like-minded countries needed to be dramatically ramped up. Australia could send a lot of our stuff, and it's not still going to dent what the States actually has. Australia doesn't have self-propelled guns and not that much ammo, and I think that's probably one of the more important things now. But we need to remember that it was going through the rumour mill that Australia looked at sending its classic Hornets and that Ukraine said, we don't want your garbage. A classic Hornet, probably the best tool to go to Ukraine. Some will say way better than the F-16 because it's a more multi-role fighter than an air superiority fighter and can have the EW pods we see with Growls, whatever as well. So there's that. But how many more years should the war drag on? We need more of everything. We need enough to end this war and defeat Russia's invasion. Hanging on is not enough. On his panel, the Ukrainian organisation's co-chair, Katerina Urgul, said it was not enough that Australia had slipped from being the largest non-NATO contributor to the sixth. Australia is not a NATO country, if you're not aware. I told someone in the army that today, and they're like, no, you're full of shit. I'm like, we're not in NATO, bro. We have a lot of signed deals and shit, similar to what like Finland had before they were in NATO. Assistance packages have become smaller and less frequent. We're appealing to the government to link support to the scale of the challenge. If Ukraine is to end Russia's illegal and immoral war on its own terms, Australia's support needs to be delivered at a scale and frequency that will help shift the dial. Stepping back and doing less has been the trend, is not in Australia's national interests. As said, we are literally on the other side of the world, and Australia has a hell of a lot of problems in defence right now. I can tell you that, being someone who's very, very close to it. But could they step up support? I think so. I think the support would be better off sent into these closer countries in Europe to try and push it on. But we do know Australia and France have signed a deal for shells for Ukraine as well. We're producing one part, they're producing another. So things are happening, but it's happening, I think, a lot slower than some would like. Now, Poland. Of course, here we have Poland, the border between Poland and Ukraine. Incredibly important that this remains open, but has been more coming out about problems here, of course. With now a couple of weeks, the farmers have been protesting. Now, Poland is in talks with Ukraine over temporarily closing the border between the two countries. That the farmers have been obstructing cross-border shipments over a week. It's been more like 2, claiming that Ukrainian produce is flooding the Polish market. Something I have a question for you. In Europe, do you see all these farming protests like on the mainstream or not? Because it's not on our mainstream, and it's bloody huge. The more you look into it, it's like everywhere. Anyway, that despite the fact Warsaw has banned grain imports from its eastern neighbour, even as it provides military aid to help Kyiv resist Russia's war of aggression. So it's banned the import because it's undercutting the market, but it's still flowing in. From Prime Minister Tusk, we're also talking with the Ukrainian side about the temporary closure of the border and exchange of goods. We want to help Ukraine, but we cannot allow this help to bring very negative effects to our citizens. Now, one of the head guys of this protest who was like researching it, he actually reckons one of the biggest thing that changed the mindset here was when the Ukrainian missile went into Poland and killed the 2 farmers, and then the Polish farmers being like, oh, this isn't good. And then Zelensky to this day still claiming it wasn't their missile. I was reading this on a Polish website that they're like, that was a turning point for a lot of these guys who have turned support away. This is why it's very important to be, I think, open and honest with what are happening. Little things, butterfly effects can push out. Anyway, we're constantly looking for a solution that will protect the Polish market from being flooded with clearly cheaper agricultural products. Just adding, it would be a temporary and painful solution for both sides. And of course, these products from Ukraine can be way cheaper because Ukraine doesn't have to meet the certain requirements that an EU country has to meet with food, all these tariffs, whatever, and tariffs have been dropped off Ukrainian imports and exports as well. Go to the border and you'll literally see Ferraris crossing into Ukraine because there's no import taxes. Oh, that's dead serious. Anyway, Tusk's comments appeared to be addressed to Polish farmers with whom he had plans to meet on Thursday. So today, the senior Ukrainian government minister denied, however, that any talks of border closure were taking place. So Tusk has said they're working with Ukraine, and Ukraine has said that they're not working with Tusk. So the Deputy Prime Minister Kabarov of Ukraine has had this then on his Facebook only 8 hours ago. No one on the Ukrainian side is negotiating about closing borders with Poland. For us, a stable working border is a matter of survival in the war with Russian aggression. So that no one on the Ukrainian side is negotiating. So there's a bit of a rift there if they are or not. I can't see why any side would lie about this. You know, negotiations between parties that are not having a good time is actually a very good thing. It actually gets you somewhere. So these are some more outtakes of what Tusk actually said. I'm ready to make even the tough decisions when it comes to the border with Ukraine, always in consultation with Kyiv, so that there are no unnecessary tensions between Warsaw and Kyiv. But we must find a solution that will be long-term. Remember that Warsaw, Poland, has been one of the biggest supporters, if not the biggest when you compare GDP to what they've taken on of Ukrainians. Millions of Ukrainians moved into Poland. The support was amazing there. Millions still remain there, but many have moved through there out into Europe as well. Warsaw has been a huge, huge player for Ukraine, and Ukraine can't afford to ruin this relationship, especially if it is moving through still illegally against other ideas and hurting economies. Anyway, we're ready for a serious conversation about limits. The limits proposed by Brussels and Kyiv are unacceptable to us, declared the head of the government. Yep, an attempt was made to slightly limit the inflow of agricultural products from Ukraine so that as much could enter duty-free as 22 and 23. So they're not happy with how much can actually roll in, and we've seen things get overturned, put in around limits on the grain, not only in Poland, but also Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, these countries down here. We have seen their concerns about this moving through. And at the end of the day, a lot of people say this is just selfish, but you need to remember that ministers in other countries, whether it's the Australian Defence Minister talked about in the article or the agricultural ministers in Poland or anywhere in the world, their primary goal is not of how best to support Ukraine. They still have their own job, and then they have other alternative goals. And the Australian Defence Minister or the Australian Chief of Defence, his main thing is still capability of the Australian Defence. That's who he serves, and that's who he should serve. And same with the Agricultural Minister from Poland, should serve Polish agricultural interests first, and then when making decisions, okay, how does this affect broader scope? But it can't all just be first. I know the idea that there is security measures and everything. I know this all flows in, but these people looking inwardly at their own responsibility and taking that first, that's not being a Kremlin bot. That is not working for Putin. It's doing their job, and then you can criticize the movements out from there, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of people, it's getting a bit long in the tooth. It's getting a bit old, this just constant, you're not doing enough, when a lot has been done, a lot is still in the works. But if it's affecting a lot of local stuff, like the farmers in here, again, if you're a farmer in here and you've just lost half your money, there's been a missile dropped, whatever, I can see why you'd be bloody shitty. And, negotiations of what's happened here is bloody important. You can't just avoid it. Anyway, legends. Long video. I apologize. If you'd like to support me, links down below. Never feel obliged. You've got way too far in this video. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.